hello and welcome, everyone. I cannot see anybody, any face. That's the structure here. So you see me, I don't see you. But hopefully we will both see Dariusz in a second because we want to run this talk together to give you some overview of, let's say, the emerging trends in collaboration that is facilitated through technology. So it will be first Dariusz, who will try to say a few words about our book, what we try to contain there, and then I will try to guide you through the concept of collaborative artificial intelligence and other collaborative emerging technologies. So I already see Dariusz here on the screen, and hopefully you will be able to see him too. In a second, he's waving at us. And I'd suggest that we start already. The first slide is already on, so Dariusz, maybe just take it away.
All right, and thank you so much for having me. It is a sign of our times that we're running a talk like this. Honestly, this is my first time that I co-deliver with somebody in person there, and me being here. It's a very interesting experience, and I think it is a sign of a collaborative society too. What we wanted to cover by this book, by this term, by this phenomenon, is essentially technology-mediated collaboration in creativity and work. And as Aleksandra already mentioned, next slide, please. We wrote a book about the collaborative society, MIT Press. If you want to find out more, there is also a website. But we want to tell you a little bit how we think it is different. It is different than other ways to look at technology, focusing on collaboration, fostering collaboration. We think that the collaborative society is a specific way of talking about it. Next slide, please.
All right.
The phenomenon that I think is super interesting is that there are emerging technologies, and as a result of their direct collaboration enabling features and engagement of large populations, we can get super multipliers for many effects that are super typical of collaboration that would otherwise we would not be noticeable or would be less noticeable for sure. And what I think is super interesting in this phenomenon is that it doesn't really create anything new, but it multiplies, it makes things bigger, things that we've known for years. For example, collaboration itself. There's solid research showing that we humans, human species, we are we are natural collaborators, and humanity is basically distinctive from other species, mostly because of collaborative aspects. Humans, for example, are very much geared towards collaborating with non-kin. And if we look at this from this perspective, it is actually very interesting. Very often, we are inclined to collaborate with others, even if we do not know them. The strangers are also collaborators. Some people even say that this is the survival of the friendliest that evolved us as civilization, as species, as we are unable to develop modalities of proper work without collaboration. And for sure, we used to have tribes, we had small groups of people collaborating with each other, but against others. But as civilization grew, those groups grew bigger and bigger. And collaboration also grew bigger and bigger. However, until it hit a threshold of the internet collaboration, it remained relatively local. So we used to collaborate with people we knew, with whom we had some interactions, with whom we had some interest. These had to be people with whom we had some established structural nodes of collaboration. The internet, though, brought something fundamentally different. Currently, we can cooperate with people we do not know at all, and we can create complex, super sophisticated, large systems. Open source is a very good example. I'm studying open source collaborators, Apache, Linux, very sophisticated and market competitive too. The most popular operating system in the server market is run by Linux, developed by open source collaborators, not knowing each other oftentimes, and cooperating to create something new. So the technology allowed them to decide together what they want to do, and to compartmentalize the tiny tidbits of work that need to be done. We really need to let it sink in. Collaborative society is a new way of doing things together with strangers by the use of technology. How is it different from different approaches like describing the same phenomenon, like the sharing economy or peer production? Next slide, please. I think it is very clear that we are currently in a situation, in a world where there are several different phenomena competing for dominance. And the ones that we want to focus on encompass a number of them, but show the collaborative aspects. For example, if we use the term sharing economy, sharing economy is the buzzword of the day, even the large corporations use it, but what does it actually mean? In the book, we're trying to show that sharing economy is a misdemeanor. It's neither sharing nor economy, mostly because it's a phenomenon that is not really focused on sharing, if we think about Airbnb or Uber, and its economy aspects are trivial. Let me explain this in a little bit more detail. If we think about a situation where you have a roommate, and this roommate, let's say, has a hair dryer, and you ask them, could I use it? And they say, sure, $5, please. Would this be sharing? In a very intuitive way, we understand that it wouldn't. It wouldn't be sharing because it would be a transaction. It would be transactional. So transactional is very often opposed to sharing, as is in the case of Uber and Airbnb. They are antithesis of sharing in this sense. But it's also not really about economy neither. If you look at the bulk of the transactions, the idea of Uber, the revolution that is actually happening there, it's about connecting, about a platform, not really about transportation. The economic effect of Uber or Airbnb is still relatively modest and is actually quite classic in the sense of what is happening. You're renting your home, your apartment to somebody else. Boohoo, big deal. It's not really so that revolutionary. What is revolutionary though are the modalities in which people collaborate with each other, the ways people talk to each other in Uber. The very social fabric is changing. How do you interact with somebody? And actually, Uber has made a lot of collaboration worse. Think about getting to the airport. You used to ask a friend or a family member, could you give me a ride? Now it's actually socially much less acceptable, basically because Uber put a price tag on it. So what we think is very worthy of pondering upon is to what extent these new technologies actually foster cooperation, and to what extent they are actually undermining the pre-existing culture of cooperative behaviors. Uber and Airbnb, in a way, are doing something opposed to what is happening in the collaborative society. I see a comment that the slides are not really entirely visible to those watching from Zoom, which I apologize for. I'm not sure if we're going to fix that, but it's mostly the narrative that I'm covering, and the slides are basically discussing the chapters from the book. So there are just a few slides. Next slide, please, by the way. And what I want to clarify, though, is that the collaborative society phenomenon covers a little more than the sharing economy and the pure production. Pure production is a phenomenon described by Yochai Benkler, a wonderful book, The Wealth of Networks. But pure production, again, focuses on a very tiny fraction of the revolution that is happening. And pure production is producing open source software and developing Wikipedia, all true, all interesting, all important. But again, a tiny fraction of what is happening. Collaborative society covers more. Collaborative society covers situations where we have non-profit platforms with non-profit users, non-profit platforms with for-profit users, for-profit platforms, non-profit users, for-profit platforms, for-profit users. And all those cases and scenarios, including citizen science, including collaborative gadgets, the quantified self, but also including remix culture, citizen science as well, all come together in this particular take on the revolution that is happening. So one more example, maybe before I give the floor to Professor Przegalińska. Think about 9gag or Imgur or 4chan. These four very interesting websites that allow collaboration online. What is so crucial about them? Do they actually produce something? Is it peer production that matters there? I would argue that it isn't. In fact, if you think about this, peer production is a phenomenon that matters for Wikipedia or Linux because something is actually being produced. But on these particular websites, what is really important is the act of collaborating. It's the present, not the future, not producing something for the future, not making something happen that will stay. It's actually the very process of doing stuff together that creates this collectivity, creates this idea of common culture, of shared culture, but also makes sense for people, makes their identity as well. And especially 4chan is super symptomatic for this particular approach, because as you probably know, everything that is published there disappears after a while. So it's super zen, super on the flow. But again, it's collaborative society, but it's not really all that much peer production. Nothing is being produced permanently. Nothing really stays with us. So what I urge you to think of is how are the collaborative modes and modalities changing over time? And just one last example that I want to share with you before I give the floor is what happened with the COVID-19 pandemic. I think this particular case is super important if we want to understand what is great and what is not so great about the collaborative society. Because if you recall the moment when it started, the pandemic started, a number of teams worldwide were looking for a way to produce 3D respirators. And it's a phenomenal approach. It's great. Normally, a respirator will cost north of $3,000. They wanted to be able to produce respirators for about $150, sometimes a little less, sometimes a little more. So great. But what is the problem? The problem is that nobody needs 20 different blueprints of a community developed respirator. We need one, but we need one that actually works. All those were created by goodwill people, enthusiasts, very good approaches, but who is going to actually certify these? Who is going to take legal responsibility if something happens when somebody uses these tools? Who is going to take care of the distribution? Who is actually going to print it? Should it be people who are owning 3D printers and just go to the hospitals, try to contribute this? We do not really have good ways, institutional surrounding to the collaborative society. And I think this is the biggest problem that we're facing. Collaborative society as the way of collaborating through technology, making decisions through technology, making things happen with large numbers of enthusiasts is already there. What is missing is the NGOs, the governments, the corporations understanding that this has already happened, that we need to adjust to this world that we live in, where collaborative society is the new normal. And with this thought, I would like to give the floor to Professor Przegalińska.
Okay, thank you so much, Dariusz. We will probably get back to all these thoughts towards the end. But I wanted to take you to kind of the next, perhaps, level of emerging technologies that could potentially facilitate collaboration, but also require collaboration. And therefore, let's try to think about, well, the main technology here that is so widely discussed during this conference, which is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence being obviously the general purpose technology, whereas Dariusz focuses quite a lot on open source communities. I tend to focus more on AI and its developments. And I do think that AI is in many ways comparable with the steam engine and with the internet, being a technology that really changes quite a lot. And obviously, internally, it's also a discipline that is really accelerating and developing quite rapidly, at least some parts of it. Because when you think about it, well, probably Hopefully you've covered some of that, but AI is an umbrella term for many different things, many different endeavors, and obviously some of them develop very rapidly and some of them not necessarily or not yet. So obviously machine learning being a bundle of different algorithms, some of them are inspired and based on artificial neural networks, some are based on statistics, like regression or classification. These are the algorithms that kind of facilitate everything else that happens in AI. But among our other disciplines that are also developing quite rapidly, we could definitely enumerate natural language processing, which is actually my specialty. And here we have language translation, a deep translation that is already context-aware, very different from the one that we had a decade ago. We also have systems that can now read a book and tell us or summarize what the book was about. And that's something that we didn't have in AI also a while ago. And the newest algorithms, deep algorithms, actually facilitate that. And then we also have text-to-speech, speech-to-text, and these are the solutions that are synthesizing human speech in natural language like French, English, Polish, German. And obviously, these are developing hand-in-hand with NLP. And we have vision, right? Vision being kind of tricky. There are some controversial examples stemming from this field of machine vision. Some of them are related to surveillance, yet some others are related to deepfakes or generation of image that can stir quite a lot and really, I would say, create some turbulence in terms of our public discourse, right? Because deepfakes are mainly used for that. I recently read in Wired, I believe, of a generative system that can essentially now really deepfake anybody and put them into a porn movie, and that's done without coding. So you don't need any particular skills to really deepfake any person that you wish to deepfake. So that's like not perhaps the best and most fortunate a reference to what's happening in vision. But obviously, generation of images is not only about deepfakes, it's also about the medical field, and it's also about logistics and transportation. And the recognition of images can on one hand be something that becomes a surveillance tool. On the other hand, it can become a very important diagnostical tool, for instance. So these are the fields that are developing very rapidly. There are some others that are dinosaurs of AI, like the expert systems, and there are also some that are not quite yet there, like robotics, for instance. So many of us, I think, maybe would share a vision that robotics is not really truly mainstream, right? When you think about AI-driven and based robotics, we don't have many systems that do that well. It's very hard, it's very cumbersome to build robots like that. Actually, it's a very collaborative endeavor that requires many different stakeholders to take part in it so that it can be done and mainstreamed. We don't exactly live in the era of AI-enabled robotics. I think that's going to happen maybe a decade from now, but at this point, it's still a very narrow field of developments. But in general, we can definitely say that AI is a technology that is definitely growing. Its applications are growing. And COVID here that Dariusz mentioned is a very interesting, I would say, case of, well, one factor really accelerating the developments of a technology that wasn't present in some fields, like, again, the medical field. And I know that GPT-3 was mentioned here, for instance, and I find that to be very interesting because it's a great example of how an AI system that is essentially built for text generation can also be used for music compositions, can be used for image generation, and for many other purposes, and can become also a tool that codes something for us that we don't need to code at all, right? So it becomes this facilitator to do other types of tasks. And in that sense, I think GPT-3 fits under the, let's say, general label of a collaborative technology of the future. And to be honest, well, obviously, it's owned by Microsoft, but currently we also have an open source version of that, which is called GPT-J. Not as good, but also quite well functioning. And I find this example of a holistic sort of AI to be a very interesting trigger of thinking about AI of the future that can cover many different things, but also become essentially a partner for us in various endeavors. Now, obviously, there are many other technologies on the horizon that I think will require collaboration because they're particularly hard. Quantum computing is one thing here. There are many voices out there that are saying that no one party can actually make that work, can create a service-based quantum computing in the future, that you need many stakeholders to take part in that. And there are also many other, I think, examples that require a very wide dialogue and a very wide, I would say, democratization, so that we can be sure that the technology that is out there is something that we want, is something that we need, and something that we can actually work with. And one example here would be, I would say, this very peculiar and to some extent problematic as well combination of synthetic biology and artificial intelligence. Probably many of you have heard of xenobots that were created a year and a half ago. These are examples of artificial life, essentially, when a neural network has created systems that were based on skin and heart cells of an African frog, and then these systems or proto-organisms were printed out and started existing. They had no metabolism, no nervous system whatsoever, but they were out there. And through that, asked many questions to us about what is it that we want to do with these forms of artificial life. Is it okay? Is it ethically fine to create that? And for these technologies, actually, a narrow pipeline of creation and a very kind of small group that works on that is not probably the pathway we would like to take. We need definitely more consideration and more collaboration. And there are many people also that are saying, well, perhaps today, we actually haven't found ourselves in the landscape of AI that we would like to have. Maybe we just have many optimization systems that generate profits, but is that the AI of the future, right? Are these the algorithms that actually serve people? Are they serving like beneficial goals, and are they also kind of developing in the area where we would like them to develop? And Carl Friston, whom I really recommend to you, his work is pretty brilliant. He's a neuroscientist, writes quite a lot about that and kind of the pathway that we took with creating artificial intelligence. So most definitely, and I think in Europe we see that quite a lot. We do have certain challenges, right? One is the challenge of open data, open yet transparent, ethical, and safe, right? This is something we would probably need to nurture, the kind of AI that is really democratized, and the kind of collaboration that is as wide as possible and has all these features that Dariusz has mentioned, right? We probably need different stakeholders here that will make investments in AI and machine learning. And I do think that the current situation is perhaps not the best one, because we need AI that specializes in many different domains that could facilitate our work, like in the field of agriculture, like in the legal sector, in education, in finance, in many really areas of our lives. But with the situation where we just have a few subjects that are capable of really creating high-quality AI, that's not the most fortunate and pluralistic landscape. So we need that, and we also need ethical frameworks, and I'm quite sure, I haven't been here yesterday, that you've touched upon these issues of trust in technology. We speak so much in the European Union about trustworthy artificial intelligence, and I spent half of my year usually in the United States, where quite often I face the perspective or like a worldview where people say, well, you are too much focused on those principles, and because of that you will stifle innovation. To the contrary, that can also be a source of innovation, right? Because if something is trustworthy, then more of us will engage in actually working with that, and it will scale. And scale is something, and mainstreaming is perhaps something that we need in artificial intelligence. We need lower threshold of difficulty so that more people can use it for their own goal, whoever they are. If they are biologists, historians, if they are researchers, whatever it is that they do, probably AI could be of support as a very wide, enhanced assistive technology, right? But it needs to be trustworthy trustworthy so that they can work with that. And trustworthiness is actually, to me, an innovation on its own. So that's also very, very interesting, I think. And I do think that, we also need certain discussions that are, again, wider about, essentially how do we build use cases for artificial intelligence? Where does it work? And where it's not necessary, where it doesn't work, right? Where does it work for us? Where it works against us, right? And to answer these questions, we need certain literacy, that's for sure. And yet another thing is that what I have noticed, particularly that's true for SMEs in my region, is that many companies or NGOs or institutions stop at creating a pilot project with artificial intelligence. So they have a pilot project, they run the pilot project, quite often it's inconclusive, and then they stop. And what they can do is hype about how they've been using artificial intelligence for a certain project, but it doesn't really change anything all in all, right? And that stops because it's not too thorough. So I do think that that's yet another thing, right? That is another realm of collaboration, that when you have an organization, be it small, medium-sized, or big, you really need to scale a certain technology, and that will bring on tectonic shifts in your organization if this is a technology with that kind of potential. And again, needs collaboration of many different units. And I wanted to show you an example of a project that we're currently running at Kozminski University, but also collaborating closely with MIT, with Harvard Labor and Work-Life Program, where we are trying to create AI that, normatively speaking, is not about replacing anyone, but rather it's about collaborating with humans and facilitating human-to-human collaboration. Because to me, that's, let's say, the human-centric kind of AI that I would like to see more of in the future. So we are really inspired by whatever happens in factories in particular, because, now I see your faces, at least some of them. That's interesting. That's cool, actually. So we're very interested as a team in, let's say, the kind of narrative that is both productive and positive in a way, where we can say that we're creating technology that is facilitating our work, essentially a collaborative technology that can also help us foster collaborative society. And we do have examples of that in factories, mainly. So in factories, already for a while, there exists a specific type of let's say, a robotic system or a robot that is called a Cobot. So it's a collaborative robot, essentially. And these sorts of robots can work actually quite slower than they normally would, just because a human is working together with them. So because of the very fact that humans are incapable of this kind of iterative work that is pushing them to their limits, and that's also not a good idea to push them to their limits in that way. That's Fordism, in fact. What the designers of these systems prefer to do is actually focus on the smoothest possible collaboration between a human and AI, and human is supervising that system, and it's maintaining that system, and having oversight over that system, and the system in a way, really mirrors the pace of the work of that human. And we found that to be very, very interesting as an approach, let's say. So these cobots, I think, can be scaled to many different areas of our life. And this is the kind of AI with, I would say, a friendlier face, right? Not the kind of AI that can be worrisome. For example, the instance of autonomous weapons is definitely a very grim example of AI application, but we can have more of these if we focus on the approach and if we take it seriously. And collaborative AI is already now really, trying to build its foundation as also a subdiscipline of artificial intelligence. So we did this study, and the first part of that study was actually a survey where we were trying to understand, the world of work today. I know it's a very wide task, and I think we didn't fully answer that question, but we did get some substance from the questions that we were trying to ask to the thousands of respondents that we surveyed, right? So the fear of artificial intelligence. Are you afraid or are you not? And it was quite interesting because most of our audience was not afraid. The elderly audience, the silver generation, if you will, was more afraid. Obviously, here the digital competence can be for all the right reasons, intelligence a bit lower, and therefore the exposure to this technology is also lower. On the other hand, the youngest generation was also like perhaps incapable of standing where their jobs will be in the future. There's such a degree of uncertainty about everything that also, whether I will have a job was a very complex question to them. But those who are productively working were not afraid of AI. And then we asked another question, and that's just a selection of 2 questions. There were many, many more, but the other one was if we assume that you have an artificial intelligence working with you, would you prefer that system to be human-like or not so much, right? Would you prefer it to show some empathy, to communicate with you through natural language, through voice perhaps, or would you like a system that is very much hierarchical and very classical, sort of? And it turned out that the younger the respondents were, the more they were inclined to have a system that really communicates with them like their peers, right? So a natural form of collaboration raises there, if we can call it natural, where people feel that they can interact very, very smoothly, and that's a condition for them, for that to happen. So that was also kind of interesting. And then, based on this very wide survey, we started creating another phase of this experiment, which was all about asking a very specific professional group, knowledge workers, managers, marketers, to be more precise, to work with us on systems that they would like to have in their workplace. So if you're a marketer, probably there are many things that you will be doing over the course of your day, and perhaps there is an assistant that you could see or envisage for the future that could help you out in some of them. And it turned out that people had many different ideas. We were going through that ideation process with them and showing them very different kind of, approaches. What kind of platform, what type of relation would you like to build with that assistant? We've asked many different questions, and it turned out that they had many different answers, right, in terms of their preference. Some of them really wanted very personalized solution, almost like a partner, yet some others were more constrained about it and said, no, a partner is way too much, but actually a friendly assistant that in a way responds to my queries but doesn't ask me questions, so it's not so loose, is my take here, is my preference. So in the experiment, actually, so we designed the assistants together with them. We have used a transformer like GPT-3. Actually, for some of these things, we have used GPT-3 when I think about it now. Yes, we also have used GPT-3 and transformer-like architectures to actually create systems that could resemble what these people wanted, right? What they envisaged as the systems of their choice. So in the experiment, we decided to divide our marketers into 2 groups. One was working on their own. The other one was working with the assistant, together with the assistant, where the assistant was stepping into the game where they wanted it and not in other places. So the experiment was essentially a simulation of a business problem. It was a set of tasks that were related to marketing. Essentially, it was about advertising a campaign for a new coffee. And obviously, when you think about a job of a marketer, it consists of so many tasks. Some of them are based on knowledge that you can let's say, vocalize, that you can verbalize. Some of them are based on tacit knowledge. You cannot even explain how you are doing things or what this task is about, but you know it's out there. It's just your intuition kind of that drives you, or your experience, if you will. But what we tried to do is just for the simplification, because this was a pilot project and we're going to move forward with that, was to give them 9 tasks, and there was a time limit for those tasks, and we decided to make it as simple as possible to see whether tasks were completed or not. Was for us a criterion of understanding how productive they were, but we also asked about some other things as well. So that was the scenario of the experiment. And here you can see those tasks, right? Market analysis, competitors analysis, advertising outline, team selection, defining goals of the campaign, budgeting also, and some others. And it was very interesting because it turned out that for most of these tasks, let me come back to that, people had similar preferences in the sense that they, wanted similar things, right? Most of them, for instance, wanted help in budgeting. Most of them were not that happy to do this iterative task. Most of them were not so happy to write this Excel table. They would prefer a transformer to generate that, and for a transformer, it's a trivial task to do. So the transformer is very good at this type of computational intelligence, whereas humans perhaps would like to excel at something else. And most of us do prefer to work with other people. We like to strategize, we like to be creative. Obviously, there are others who perhaps enjoy the iterative tasks, and they should be allowed to do so, right, if that's their preference. However, we can see that a strong majority prefers different tasks and would like to delegate some tasks to an assistant of this kind. And the results were quite interesting because the results really confirmed our hypothesis here, that the group that worked together with the assistant performed much better than the group that worked on their own. But bear in mind, they were not working with an assistant that was top-down imposed on them. They were working with an assistant that was co-designed by them in a participatory manner. Right? So they were able to really express what they wanted, and only through that they obtained a solution that was tackling whatever issues they wanted to be tackled by this assistant. And I think it's very important, because if we want really AI to kind of deliver on the promise, and AI technology can do that, it can be a big sandbox of different solutions, we need full participation, right? Because otherwise there will be a lot of rejection to this technology for all the right reasons that I can fully understand, right? But if it's the new internet, then let's make it work for that. And yeah, I do think that this sort of project that we have investigated was, to us, a gateway towards understanding that perhaps collaborative type of AI is not only the thing that is effective at work and gives more satisfaction, because that was another result, that people that worked together with the assistant were happier with the results of their work. But another thing is that, normatively speaking, or speaking from the policy perspective, it's also a solution that is not so grim. It's not a solution that causes so much fear. I think it's much more widely accepted. So that was, I think, a very good start, and we will definitely continue with that. And obviously, it's not the only instance, right? We have more collaborative technologies out there, for sure, right? We have many things that Dariusz spoke about during the COVID pandemics that have been happening. Many of us have experienced that, right? Obviously, AI is this big kind of mind enhancement technologies, but let's think about, for instance, 3D printed masks. I actually had a neighbor who was doing that. She received a pattern from someone else, then she optimized the pattern, she sent it elsewhere, and she started producing 3D printed masks for everybody in the building, right? And that was kind of a grassroots innovation that was absolutely collaborative on all possible levels. We had other interesting projects, right, that were happening, particularly in 2020, such as wearable sanitizers, right? So you would have an open design of this solution. Everybody could share and join. It was very easy and very cost-free, essentially, to build. And many innovations of that kind were really accelerated by COVID. And COVID being a trauma, right? We are here in this setting. I guess none of us really forgot that the pandemic is really out there still. In that way, it turned out to be really a springboard for collaborative society, at least its early phase. And I do think that, certain questions regarding also artificial intelligence and other big technologies like blockchain, like IoT, were raised also during this pandemic and before that, and hopefully will continue to be raised regarding their social responsibility, right? Are we using these technologies for things that we all care about, like the climate crisis or the public health crisis? Are they used for that purpose or for something else? I think it's something that we started to see being vocalized much more louder than before. And we've had interesting projects, right? For instance, one of them maybe that was discussed, I don't know, here yesterday is related to kind of not really prediction of how the epidemic would spread in different places, but detection of weak signals of the pandemic happening, right? So Blue Dot is a system of this kind, but it's a private company that serves United States and Canada. These were the two clients of this company. Actually, the system was able to detect that there was something going on in Wuhan in early November 2019. So that was early. That's a weak signal detection, really, right, when you think about the pandemic. And by the way, a system is an NLP system, so it's a natural language processor. And it was able to detect that, but it only served some who paid, right? And the question is whether we can incubate similar technologies in a collaborative manner that they serve us all, right? And obviously, you know, other endeavors, scientists worldwide. I do know examples of chemists from Poland working on that therapy search, COVID therapy search, that was essentially a global collaborative endeavor, also using AI modeling. And now we see its outcomes, right? So the first really therapies that start to work are being recommended through that shared endeavor. In language processing, examples, for instance, of open source bots that could be deployed by hospitals worldwide to receive phone calls of the patients and classify by symptoms what's going on with them, and then queuing them to particular doctors, right? That was definitely, I think, a great help, right? So we need these types of collaborative technology that share the principles, really, of collaboration and also allow us to collaborate on things that we need to focus on as humans. So that, I think, is very, very important. And yeah, well, there are also like projects that I think are well, again, questions about them should be voiced out. So another project that I've seen that I was a bit worried by was crowd detection. Obviously, you can use it, again, with machine vision. And I guess it can serve you well, but there is definitely a question here regarding the kind of surveillance that the system facilitates. And I do think that with technologies of this kind, you should have an option of opt-out, and they should be designed in such a way that you make a conscious decision about whether you want them or not, right? And that's the gateway to trustworthiness and the gateway to collaboration, I think, at its best. So yeah, regarding AI as a collaborative technology, I guess this is what I wanted to voice out. And I'm wondering if Dariusz is still with us. We have the remaining 3 minutes or 2 minutes or so. And I wanted to call out Dariusz so that he can also summarize some of that for us to make it really hybrid. Is Dariusz there? No?
Yes, indeed. I am here.
Awesome.
I got degraded from a panelist to a viewer, so I had to take a while.
We upgraded you again.
Thanks.
Okay, so some final words from you regarding collaborative society and what you expect perhaps in the coming 5 years or decade or so, right? Do you expect more collaboration, or is it just a dream of ours that collaborative technologies will grow and together with that the collaborative society will upgrade itself?
And that was just the beginning. Yeah, I think definitely collaborative society is incoming, and I think we need to observe this is the chance that comes once in hundreds of years, a chance for our civilization to find new modes, new modalities, new approaches. This is the approach to the crisis of capitalism and whatnot. So I think we really need to embrace it, and collaborative society is a really powerful answer.
Awesome. Okay. With that, we want to thank you, I guess both of us, and invite you to some conversations either via Zoom or here physically. Thank you so much.